Does this work? That works.
This is an interesting place. Jim's lab is actually in a building I used to work in, and it's kind of interesting to listen to some of the topics. One of Jim's main claims to fame is something from the way past in which he was mentioned 43 times in the cuckoo's egg. 34. And his mother was complaining he was swearing each time. But Jim's a very good guy, and I totally enjoy it. I'd really like to encourage you to all turn off the cell phones because he can carry a weapon, so he can shoot them. Jim?
Good morning, folks. Here's what I'm going to talk about this morning. I'm going to talk about the DoD Cybercrime Center, who we work for, what we do, who we do it to, digital forensics, and digital forensics is really an evolving discipline, and we're going to talk to you about why, some of the operations, some of the cases that we've gotten involved in, where we need some research, where we've done some research, and a couple other little things. There are 5 major criminal and counterintelligence investigative organizations in the Department of Defense that are listed there. So that's basically who we support in the DoD Cybercrime Center. And our investigative jurisdiction, we have about 3.5 million military and civilian members in the DoD, and we also have investigative jurisdiction over folks that victimize the Department of Defense. So pretty broad, worldwide investigative jurisdiction. We may not be the primary investigative organization, but we do have investigative jurisdiction when we're a victim. We have a worldwide mission. We have over 600 law enforcement sites worldwide, approximately 5,000 agents, and we run generally criminal, counterintelligence, counterterrorism type cases. We do have traditional forensics labs like you see on CSI. The U.S. Army Criminal Investigations Lab in Atlanta, Georgia. Navy has 2 traditional labs, I think one in San Diego, one in Norfolk. You know, and they do the traditional stuff like you see on Navy NCIS, only it takes more than one person to do it all. We also, DoD has the Defense Computer Forensics Lab, which specializes in digital forensics, and we'll talk about that primarily. The DC-3's mission is threefold. It was laid out by the Deputy Secretary of Defense. The operational mission is to do support ongoing felony investigations as well as any other command-directed inquiry, safety investigations, things like that. We have a training program, pretty robust, about 40 instructors where we train all the investigators in DoD, whether they're criminal or counterintelligence investigators, on how to do computer crime investigations and how to do digital forensics. And then the newest entity is mine. It's the Defense Cybercrime Institute, and we're responsible for the research and the development of new digital and investigative forensic tools, as well as the testing and validation and evaluation of those tools. And we'll talk about why that's important. The organization, you know, typical line and block chart. Our executive agency is the Air Force Office of Special Investigation. I'm an OSI agent myself. But we do have a kind of a board of directors, which is comprised of the deputies of all the DoD law enforcement agencies. And they kind of give us our priorities and our stick and rudder. Customer base, we work with primarily everybody that we can. Our primary customers are on the left-hand side, the DoD law enforcement counterintelligence organizations. But we also deal with the intelligence community. We support those guys. If you don't recognize an acronym, that's probably because you don't need to know it. Lots of universities, research labs, and basically all the federal law enforcement agencies. Recently, my boss, Steve Shirley, who's the executive director of the Cybercrime Center, was just put in charge of a standing task force to deal with an investigative joint task force for cyber investigations. And we have major investigations, primarily in the intrusion world, and each law enforcement agency, believe it or not, goes and does their own thing. So, and doesn't collaborate or coordinate that with the others. So obviously that's not the best way to do that. So now we have this standing joint task force that my boss heads up, where he brings these guys together and farms out the leads, and everybody coordinates and cooperates together. So we're learning, we're getting better. And why is this a big deal for the Department of Defense? It's called the Global Information Grid. And do I need to turn this puppy off? Basically, the internet is a integrated weapon system for us. And it's not email, it's not just logistics, but we have sensors out there that are using the internet to feed the collection back for analysis, and then targeting can be munitions, things that cause things to blow up, kinetic energy, like bomblets could be. Each bomblet could have an individual IP address that could be retargeted while in flight. Okay, so the integrity of that network is crucial to our mission. So that's why this is a big deal. This is kind of how we're structured in the Department of Defense. Agent-wise, at the base of the pyramid, every agent is given specific training on how to investigate computer-related crimes. How to seize evidence is what they get to learn how to do. They don't get to process evidence. But every agent needs to know how to collect evidence at a crime scene. But you wouldn't want that guy, that local cop on the street or that investigator on the street doing your DNA testing. That's for specially trained folks. The next level up is the computer crime investigators, and we have several here, or former computer crime investigators from the Department of Defense: Jose Granado, Brett Padres, David Savage, a couple guys. Oh, I didn't mean to out you. But their job is computer-related crimes from beginning of the day to the end of the day, supporting whatever case as they need. So they get a lot of specialized training. And then the laboratory kind of gets, my boss calls it the complex and the target, and I call it the big, the bad, and the ugly. 2 years ago, I was the director of ops for the lab. And how many of you still have trash 80s at home? How many of you know what trash 80s are? It's like, okay. Well, we actually had a case where we had, it was a fraud case for God's sakes, and we had data that came off of a trash 80. And we had 2 trash 80s, and we had software for it. So you wouldn't expect a computer crime investigator in the street to have a trash 80 or an Apple IIc or a Commodore 64 or be able to understand how that thing operates. But we do. And then the big cases. We have one case back in 2003, 75 terabytes, and it was an espionage case. So it was a presidential directed investigation, and so we had to pull out all the stops, and 75 terabytes was collected, and we had to go through that. It took us about 17, 18 months to go through all that data. So big, the bad, and the really ugly. And when I first started doing computer crime investigations 19 years ago, we were pleading with the investigator when you got to a crime scene, if you saw that computer over in the corner, seize that electronic file cabinet. Well, now, whenever you see a search warrant, you're seeing the cops carrying that computer out. But what we're trying to get them to understand is there's a lot of things, other things out there. There's an expanding crime scene. Just in this room alone, there's probably a couple thousand pieces of media that could contain potential evidence. And knowing some of you, they do. So, remember that thumb drive, get that guy's wristwatch, get his pager, his cell phone, get those other things. So getting folks, an investigator who's not a computer crime investigator, to recognize what might be of evidentiary value and be able to seize it is paramount. And we do forensics the same way everybody else who does forensics. We use the traditional term forensics. Forensic is the application of a science for a legal process. I've heard the CIA and NSA. How many of you are here from NSA? Yeah, yeah. So, anyway, I've heard them talk. They have 3 forensics labs. Well, those some bitches have never testified in a court of law, have never maintained chain of custody, so they really don't do forensics. What they do is media analysis. And, that's valuable and it's important stuff, but that's not forensics. Forensics is a buzzword that a lot of folks use, but it's not used correctly. Forensics is the application of a science for a legal process. So, our process is, you make that, in digital forensics, we get an opportunity to clone evidence. You don't get to do that with blood. So we can make as many mirror image copies as we need for processing. So we do that forensic imaging, and then we try to work with the image, and we do this traditional stuff, looking for the known files, deleted files, hidden files, slack files, metadata, all that kind of stuff. And then we do the detective work. That's where the analyst, the examiner, actually has to write an operations plan for their exam. And they have to know what the elements of proof are, the elements of the offense that they're investigating, and be able to find the information off that media that either proves or disproves that allegation. So that's the hard part. And then what we do, unlike the intelligence community, has to go to court, so it has to be unclassified. Well, the tools that we have to use need to be unclassified as well. So we're developing clues and leads for the investigator as we go through these forensic exams, and then ultimately we go to testify. When I first got there, I got to the lab as a director of ops the week after 9/11. When I got there, in FY01, we only had to send 8 examiners out to go testify on about 350 cases. In FY02, I had to send 38 examiners to go testify on about 400 cases that we ran. And the following year, we had to send 60. So the trend was that defense attorneys are getting smarter. So they're not challenging the evidence, they're challenging that forensic process that was used to get the evidence. And then the digital, this is an expansion of the crime scene investigation. We're actually executing the search warrant inside that piece of media. So the first thing that we would have to do when we got a case is we'd have to review the search warrant. What authorized us to have this piece of media? And the search warrant is very specific on what we're looking for. So we had one case where a floppy drive, a floppy disk was found and it was stamped secret. So the investigator said, look for classified and any indications of who threw that in a trash can. So we were running that case and he said, no, by the way, look for child porn too. Well, that was beyond the scope of the warrant. We certainly wouldn't be able to do that. So you need to know what the warrant authorizes you to do. And in some cases, a magistrate might limit you based on the probable cause that allows you to get that search warrant, may limit you to only, even though you seize the entire hard drive, it may limit you to look at a particular file in a particular file folder. And even though you have in your possession everything else, you may not be able to look at the rest of it based on the scope of the warrant. And then this is an evolving discipline. And to make that clear, the Wright brothers didn't have a pilot's license and didn't follow a flight plan. When Jose Granado was a computer crime investigator with OSI in the early 90s, he was winging it, weren't you, Jose? You still wing it. You get paid a lot more for winging it now. But we winged it. You know, there was not much in the way of training, not much in the way of resources. A lot of times we didn't make that mirror image copy because we just didn't have time and we didn't have the money or the resources to have those benefits. But in today's environment, that's an evolving discipline. And there's a downside to that for state and local law enforcement. I got a call as we've been working through this process with the National Institute of Justice and the American Society of Crime Lab Directors in establishing what the criteria for this digital forensics discipline was going to be. This really put is going to put a resource strain on state and local law enforcement and also the private sector who does forensics. I had a trooper call me from a particular state, and in the middle of the night, and he says, you know, Christy, you're going to put me out of business. You know, my organization doesn't fund my computer crime unit, so I have to run cases out of on my home computer in my basement, and you're going to put me out of business. And you know what? That's exactly what we're going to do, because we've evolved. I'm not sure I want him running that case. You know, there's no peer review on his cases. I don't know what training that individual received. So I'm not sure, when you put people's lives and their freedom at risk, you know, I think you want to do this the right way, just like every other forensics discipline. So proficiency testing and certification, standard configuration for each system. In the old days, when I first got to the lab, an examiner would get a case from birth to grave, and they would do the wiping of the glassware. They would create their own operating system. They create their own findings drives, and then they put the tools on that they wanted to use. Well, those tools weren't tested. There's a friend of mine who wrote, I won't mention his name, but he wrote all the investigative software that every law enforcement in the entire world used in the 80s. Well, in the early 90s, somebody got some funding and said, well, let's go test that software. And what we found was it wasn't forensically sound. It didn't come up with the right answers all the time. So now, in this evolving discipline, we're going from winging it to a certified practitioner. This is new, it's expensive, and there's no going back. This is a train going down the track. So what we did is we signed up to the American Society of Crime Lab Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board, and they accredited most of the forensics labs in North America. And it's a traditional, you know, laboratory type certification. And their objectives are obvious: improve lab quality, develop and maintain criteria to assess performance, provide independent, impartial, objective systems so you're being inspected by your peers, and provide a list of labs meeting the established criteria. So right now they've accredited 289 laboratories. This is as of June 12th, and it shows you how they break out. So it's 9 international labs, mostly state and local labs, but also 21 federal labs. But only 5 of those laboratories actually have digital forensics that has been accredited. So this is just the criteria for ASCLD for digital forensics labs was just established in the fall of '03. So now everybody's scurrying around to figure out how to meet that criteria and those standards and best practices. And so this is just the process. You're not interested in that. But now digital evidence is an established forensic discipline, just like fingerprint analysis, firearms and tool marks, and serology and DNA. Their digital evidence has, of these 5 labs, they have a series of criteria. And there are 3 categories: the essential, important, desirable. And in the essential, if you miss one, your lab fails. I mean, it's that simple. And of the 279 labs that are accredited, they've done something like 760 inspections. And in those 760 inspections, no laboratory has ever walked out with the gold plaque after the inspection. There's always findings, things that they have to fix, and they get a remediation period because the criteria is so tight. And, you know, for digital evidence, here's some of it. We had 1 findings. We went through the laboratory accreditation process inspection back in first week of June, and they found what they did is they pulled cases, the last 5 cases from every examiner, okay, and these inspectors who are digital forensics experts went through each one of the case files, and the finding that they found was that every single page on every single report was not numbered, 1 of 73, 2 of 73, and initialed and dated. And because every single page in all 5 for all 50 of our examiners, we failed. So obviously the peer review didn't catch that. So what will happen is they'll come back in 90 days, and you have to be able to show that in the last 90 days that you've met this. So we had been doing it for 30 days, but the 60 days prior, people had forgotten to number all the pages, and nobody caught it. So now they'll come back in the next month or so, and they'll randomly go through and look at our case files. And if we numbered all the pages, we'll be an accredited digital forensics lab, and probably the world's best. Our biggest, best too. Annual proficiency tests. So everything that an examiner does, they have to be tested on every single year. Well, what if they fail? If they fail a proficiency test, not only do you have to provide remedial training, but you have to go back and look at the previous cases, the last 2 or 3 cases that individual worked on, and go over and see if they screwed those up as well. So there's a lot of overhead to this whole process, about a 30 to 40% overhead. Digital forensics is pretty expensive as it is, and to have this proficiency testing, quality assurance manager, peer reviews, and documentation, you wouldn't believe. And because the inspectors come from the traditional world of forensics, they're worried about cross-contamination. So we had to change procedures, and now every hard drive has to be sealed because you wouldn't want to put one on top of the other and have those electrons, migrate and contaminate the other hard drive. So I mean, there's some things in there that need to change, but all the stuff that we have in at any given time in our evidence room, we'll have it somewhere between 4,000 and 7,000 pieces of media, and each one has to be individually sealed. And every time it's open, it has to be annotated, and it's just lots of overhead. And what makes this really interesting is that some states are now passing legislation that you can't introduce any evidence into any of their courts unless it's produced by an accredited forensics lab. Well, Texas did that 2 years ago and had to suspend the legislation two weeks later because it came to their attention they didn't have any accredited forensics labs in Texas. But in the not too distant future, I think Texas was the first one. There are 5 now, and there's legislation pending in many more states that, if you're going to introduce this kind of evidence, it's going to have to come from an accredited lab, and not many labs are accredited. So we talked about this significant impact on state and local law enforcement, and actually federal. So I mean, this is really expensive stuff. We'll talk a little bit about our forensics lab. When I first started doing forensics in the 80s, we thought, and when encryption in the early 90s, when encryption got out of the bottle and we knew about steganography and all that, we were worried that the bad guys were, going to use going to use encryption, and we would never be successful in a forensic exam. And what we found was that criminals are just lazy and stupid. Thank God. So what's killing us is not the technology. What's killing us is sheer flipping volume. My bosses previously spelled computer with a K. So I have to put the zeros next to things so that they understand, because they don't understand a difference between a K and an M and a G. They just see a letter change, and that doesn't mean anything to them. So why do exams take so long? So that's it's like when you take your clothes to the cleaner, all you want to know is when you're going to get it back. Well, it's the same thing with agents when they submit their cases to a forensics lab. When the hell are you going to give me my case back? Well, it's getting more and more difficult. So I put this analogy together for my bosses so that they will understand. If you took a typical novel, 60 characters per line, 20 lines per page, 300 pages, you multiply that out, comes to 360,000 characters, the old floppy diskette. So then you extrapolate that out to the number of books that you had to review forensically. My boss came back to me and he said, that analogy won't work. I said, why? He said, we're agents, we don't read books. So he said, but we seize file cabinets, so, calculate it out. So 1 gigabyte, 1 gig equals about 17 file cabinets. The average case today, I just updated this morning, is 119 gig with 68 pieces of media. That's the average case. So that's over 2,000 file cabinets that has to be gone through forensically. So I took this to extremes for my boss, so in case you ever want to know this stuff. In FY03, we had a major surge, and I'll show that to you in a second. But if you printed everything out and stacked it up, it would have been over 18,000 Washington monuments. So in FY03, we had that one case that was an espionage case, 75 terabytes. And we also started receiving all the media from the global war on terrorism after we invaded Afghanistan. So all that is processed by our folks. So we had to process 147 terabytes in FY03. Obviously, we didn't. This is incoming. That's not outgoing. Okay. So in FY04, we were still doing FY03 stuff. Like I said earlier, definition of forensics: application of the science for a legal process. It's different than media analysis. Two different things. The intelligence community, certs, they do media analysis. They don't do forensics. Talk about some of our stats for FY04. This is media, and three major categories of cases are criminal cases, rapes, drugs, murder, child pornography, counterintelligence, and fraud. Well, intrusions is a sliver in there, and majority of cases you don't know what the motive is. You don't know whether it's counterintelligence or whether it's criminal. So we separate those out. But you can see it's pretty equally distributed. These are criminal cases. So number of cases, not media. So if you look at our criminal cases, over 50% were child porn or child sex abuse cases. And 18% were sex abuse cases, sex offenses. So rapes, things like that. So almost 2/3 of our criminal cases are sexually related, mostly dealing with children. Major number one cybercrime is not intrusions. Number one cybercrime for every law enforcement agency in the world is child pornography. We had the director of India's Bureau of Investigation, which is really huge, much bigger than the FBI's. Their number one cybercrime was child pornography. So one of the crimes that's enabled by the technology. Pardon? Sure. Absolutely. There's emails going back and forth. There may be diaries. They may be talking to a friend. They may have plotted out their plan. It's, anything that would relate to the investigation to support the allegation. Timeliness, you can see the spike in FY03 due to all the evidence, all the media that we got, and we're slowly getting through it, and we're down around just under 60 days for a forensic exam today. Disc and tape repair, we do that. We had to talk about a case we had back in 1991. We had a dependent wife of an Air Force member. She was found in the front seat of her pickup truck in the Philippines. She had been stabbed 42 times. The husband was a suspect but had an alibi. So when the agents went to interview the husband as a witness, not as a subject, they went to his office and he had a box on the floor next to his desk. And as he walked around his desk, he reached into the box and he pulled out what appeared to be a single 5 1/4 inch floppy disk and a pair of pinking shears, and he began to mutilate the diskette. Now, when I talked to the agents later, they said the scissors were about this big and he was kind of fending them off. I don't know if that's true or not. But it was his diskettes. By the time they got the pieces away from him, the scissors away from him, he had done the damage. So I got a call from the Philippines and they said, hey, there's obviously something on here he didn't want us to see. So we started putting the discs together like a jigsaw puzzle. And what we found was we didn't have one diskette. We actually had two diskettes. And they didn't actually get all the pieces for us. We were able to separate them because they were two different manufacturers and the Mylar was actually different colors. And so we were able to separate the two into two different piles, except for the four in the middle. We couldn't tell which diskette they came from. But you can see they were pretty well mutilated. We had 23 pieces. He used pinking shears. He crumpled them up. They were pretty well mutilated. So we went to everybody in law enforcement. Nobody had a technique to recover the data. So we went to the intelligence community. We went to NSA. And after negotiation with their general counsel, they said, yeah, you can talk to our people. So, NSA, they had 6 different groups. So we had to go brief each individual group separately because one group's not allowed to know what the other group does. And they all came to the same conclusion. Yeah, we have a lot of theories on how to get that data, but we've never actually tested those theories. So what we'd have to do is we'd have to get people, we'd have to get a lab, we'd have to get equipment, and in about a year we could go test those theories. Well, meanwhile, our boy's been arrested. We have a speedy trial problem. So, they suggested we go to the private sector. So I went to the private sector. My first call went to 3M. I called 3M because one of the discs was a 3M disc. So I called 3M and they said, no problem, we can get that data for you. I said, great. And because you guys are good guys, we're going to do this for you for free. I went, yeah, okay. So a vice president came down to my office and I showed him this picture and he goes, oh, I thought you meant they were cut in half. Well, I'm just a knuckle-dragging cop. I'm not a rocket scientist, but I know that if you have 2 diskettes and 23 pieces, them some bitches ain't cut in half. But anyway. He said, you mind if I take a copy of this photo back to my techies? I said, sure. So I gave him a copy of the photo. I've never heard from 3M again, so I'm only assuming they don't know how to recover that data. We went to several other folks. Everybody kept pushing me to one scientist from IBM who put the Challenger tapes back together after that disaster. Tracked him down, called him, and he went, wow, interesting problem, Jim. Inner tracks are more dense than the outer tracks. You have timing issues. He said, if you figure this out, let me know. Great, thank you. So my last ditch effort is to go to the CIA. So I had a couple buddies over at CIA, and they said, we can get that data, no problem. But their problem is that they're not going to testify. They're not going to give up this classified technique in a murder trial. So we negotiated. I lost. So we take, my deputy, Ed Cutchins, and I, we take these discs around to the CIA headquarters. And they signed a chain of custody documents. I don't know why, but they did. And they had my discs for 2 weeks. And finally they called and said, okay, come get your damn discs. And I said, well, what does that mean? And they said, well, come on over. So Ed and I, we drive around the Beltway over to CIA headquarters. We go in, and they said, we're kind of embarrassed. All the techniques that we had didn't work. And short of a contract for big bucks, we're kind of out of business. And I said, well, this is one of those must-solve cases for the military. Define big bucks. He said $500K. Well, Jose, you remember $500 was a lot of money for us in those days. So, Ed picked me up off the floor, brushed me off. We grabbed our discs, signed the chain of custody documents. We're driving back around the Beltway. Get about halfway around, Ed says to me, okay, you let all the big boys have a shot. You're going to give me a shot. So what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to scotch tape them back together. I said, get out of here. You can't scotch tape these things back together. The tape will rip the read-write heads off. He said, hell, we won't know if we don't try. It's kind of hard to argue with that kind of mentality. So we got back to the office, got a diskette, put some data on it, cut it in quarters, and he puts scotch tape on it, 3M tape, by the way. On the bottom side, sticks it back in the jacket, and then he whips out my laptop with my 5 1/4 drive. Sticks it in, said, okay, we're going to read it. I said, no, you're not. You're going to rip the read-write heads off. He said, we won't know if you don't try. Okay, turned it on. I watched my disk drive dance across the table for about 15 seconds, and then you could hear the read-write heads when you shake it, and they were rolling around. You can assume what I said. So I said, let's pretend we're NSA scientists. And I was briefing Jack one day, and Jack said, you took a coffee break? So after we took our coffee break, we pulled the disc out of the jacket, and on the top where the splice was, the splice was still nice and smooth. On the backside where the tape was frayed. Tape is what ripped the read-write heads off. So we're sitting there brainstorming, and I said, well, what if we take a second diskette and we cover up the tape, line up the timing holes, tape them together at the hub? Well, the thickness of 2 diskettes, will that rip the read-write heads off? Well, we had no clue. So I sent one of the guys up to get a stack of disk drives, because I know we're going to rip the hell out of these things. And meanwhile, we put a control disc together, put 2 discs, one with character A's throughout, the other with character B's, cut them in quarters, taped them together, stuck it in, and we were able to do physical reads and get A's from the top and B's from the bottom. So now we had a technique. So what we ended up doing is taking a blank formatted diskette, take a piece of evidence, scotch tape it on, take a scalpel, cut a piece out that matched the piece of evidence, implanted the piece of evidence, taped it on one side, and then covered up with another blank diskette, and then we did physical reads. Then we'd have to reverse that process to get the other side. Using that process, we got anywhere from 85 to 95% of all the data off the disks. So I immediately called the CIA, said, got all the data. They said, how'd you do that? I said, I'm not telling you, Jack. And then I had an epiphany. I said, no, I can tell you how to do it, and I'd save you big bucks. We can do it for $490,000 for you. So that's how we funded our DoD's computer forensics lab. It was kind of interesting because, the orientation of the pieces, some of them didn't have an outer edge or an inner hub, so it was hard to orient them. So what we did was, I had this stuff called Magnecy. It was a real fine ferrous powder suspended in alcohol-based solution. You throw it on magnetic media. The powder lines up with the magnetized spots and the liquid evaporates, and you can actually see tracks and sectors. Now you can line things up with, in a 360K diskette, you can just line them up with a magnifying glass, tape them in place, brush the powder off. Now with a 3.5-inch diskette, you need a microscope to line them up. The guy had crumpled the discs up, so we had to find a way to iron them. So we came up with a soldering iron with a piece of brushed aluminum tubing, slit the tubing so it would slide across the heating element, put it on a rheostat so we could adjust the temperature. 114 degrees if you need to do this is best. And, and you rolled the soldering iron, and it would flatten it out pretty good. That's the Magnecy, the tape developer. And then with 3.5-inch discs, they got the metal hub and there's a little square. That square has to line up with the starting sector. Well, you can't see the starting sector unless you throw this tape developer on, and then you line up the little square in the hub, and then you can read the disk with a regular disk drive. What we found on the diskettes was his wife had divorced him and taken 2 kids and moved back to the United States. We found the love letters that he was sending to his ex-wife saying how much he loved her, wanting her to come back and remarry him, which she eventually did. At the same time he was sending those letters to his ex-wife, he was sending letters to his Filipino girlfriend saying how much he loved her, how he hated his ex-wife, how she was trying to alienate his 2 kids and taking for all his worldly possessions, and I've been through 2 divorces and I can relate. So his wife finally agrees to come back. His Filipino girlfriend was interviewed, and she said that he had given her a typed letter, probably a computer-generated letter, asking her to hire the hitman, which she did. They split, 3 of them split $105. When she had destroyed that letter, the best she cut it up, so we asked her to write that letter out the best she could recollect, and we did find the last paragraph of that letter just as she had written it out. We also found the letter that he fired off to the insurance company when his wife did come back, upping her life insurance to $450,000. So once he was maintaining his innocence until we produced all this evidence, he then confessed, pled guilty, and was sentenced to life in prison. So I know we are a real forensics lab because Forensics Files was out in February and March filming this case. So we had to do a recreation. So I had to find an old Zenith laptop that we had, and we had to go through and recreate, had to find 5.25-inch diskettes. All my guys kept saying, throw those things away. I said, no, you're not throwing those away, and thank God we didn't, because we had to cut up and redo a reenactment. So this should be airing on Court TV's Forensics Files in August, I believe. GPS devices. Global war on terrorism, we're seizing GPS devices, and they're a world of information. We're trying to get agents to recognize, that when you find one of these in any kind of case or in the global war on terrorism, don't turn it on. Because what these things have, basically three things. Waypoints, those are where you plant the flag. How many of you have GPS devices? Okay? It's becoming an appliance now rather than a luxury item. When you plant that flag, that's a waypoint. When you put a series of those together, that's a route. What people don't realize is whether it's displayed or not, it's recording where it is with a date and time stamp in a track. It may not display that, but it will tell you every place that thing has been. Well, when you turn that thing on, you're losing evidence. It's first in, first out. You're losing evidence out the other side. So while the agent's playing with it to figure, hey, look, I can see where I am, he's losing evidence out the other side. So if you see a series of these, you plot it on a map, and you plot all of them on a map, you might find points of convergence. So maybe this is where you want to set up your surveillance in a drug case, or this may be the dead drop in an espionage case, or if it's in the global war on terrorism, maybe this is where you want to have a predator flying overhead. So lots of great information coming out of GPS devices. Hard disk repair. When I first got to the lab the week after 9/11, I knew we were going to invade Afghanistan, and I knew when we did, even though this is a pretty backward country, we were going to seize computer media. Now, that wasn't an easy sell to a lot of the senior leadership, but we did. And I got to tell you, when you send a cruise missile into a cave with computers, that's problematic to the computers. So we had to develop a technique, we had to develop some capability to recover hard drives and computers. In fact, we had a SEAL team, special ops guys that were getting ready to deploy, so we had them come through, we gave them a tour, and I said, I got to ask this question because I heard this as a rumor. Could you explain to me how you seize computer media? They said, sure. This is how we're trained. While bullets are flying, we go in, we look for those little gray or black boxes sitting over in the corner, we grab them, we lift them over our head, and we smash them on the ground until the cabinet breaks open, and then they usually have black or silver boxes with a lot of wires. We rip those sumbitches out and we run like hell. I said, okay, so we issued them screwdrivers. Because again, that's problematic for us. But we do have a hard disk drive capability. We also do audio and video enhancement for the traditional law enforcement mission, surveillance videos, body wires, things like that. You name the media, we have to deal with it. And basically what we're doing is enhancing that video so we can see the tattoo, the logo on the shirt, trying to get the license plate number, etc. Let me give you an example of some of the things that we do. This is called frame averaging. I'm going to show you a video on the left. This is a technical term called a pole camera, set up by our tech agents. It's a camera on a pole. Yeah, and of course it played when okay. Anyway, it wouldn't change it. You would see a little flicker here, and I'll see if I can get this to play. Yeah, there we go. Frame averaging, we took that same video, frame averaging digitizes each frame, stacks them on top of one another, and then looks down through each pixel and takes an average. So when you add contrast and gain and brightness, you add a lot of random noise. So this takes that random noise out. So this is the same video that this is. And now I can make out 2 or 3 numbers on the license plate. It's a Ford Mustang. There's a cat sleeping underneath the car. Here's a trash can. Here's a pickup truck with a cap on it, and the lid is the gate is open, and it looks like an apartment complex, garden apartment. So that was only 20 frames of that data. So lots of interesting things that you can do. But then folks asked us in the military safety community if we could support them. Military aircraft don't have hardened black boxes like commercial aircraft, but most of them have some kind of audio or video for training purposes, or gun cameras for battle damage assessment. Well, when there's an aircraft mishap, that's what we call crashes in the military, mishaps. Whenever there's a mishap, this is a video recorder off an F-14 that was in simulated air-to-air combat in the southwest United States, and the pilot of this aircraft was killed. So our job is, this is how we extract the tape. You can see the video 8 tape here, and tape is pretty resilient, so even though everything else is pretty well mutilated and destroyed, tape is pretty resilient. So we get it out, we got to clean it up. We've actually had tape come in from an Osprey that crashed in the Potomac, and we got a Tupperware bin with tape, seaweed, jellyfish, we got a PCM-CIA card that had gone down in the Sea of Japan, that had been in seawater for 3 months, and we had to recover data from that. So we spool it all up, you get it synced up, and now we got a signal, and this is the last frame of the heads-up display before the crash, and that mid-air collision. So as soon as I get my mouse here, there we go. This is the other aircraft. You can see that the guy's in a hard angle to the right. They're at 7,180 feet, doing 490 knots. He has 578 rounds of simulated ammunition. And the next frame, the wing of this aircraft goes through the canopy of this plane, killing this pilot. The other pilot was actually able to get back. The initial safety board, they have to come to a conclusion what caused this accident pretty quickly, within 30 days. Based on the interviews and the radar, the initial results were that the other pilot, the surviving pilot, was at fault for the accident. When they saw this, everybody had everything backwards. And actually, the deceased pilot was at fault for the accident, so we saved a pilot's career on this one. We also have, we talked about the global war on terrorism. We have a mission called the Clearinghouse for Intelligence Media Exploitation. We have a 96 terabyte SANS where we process all the media seized from the global war on terrorism for the DoD's law enforcement, counterintelligence, and intel guys. We also, I'm sure you all heard about the espionage case at Guantanamo, where we had contract interpreters that were suspected of working for Al-Qaeda. Well, that entire classified network of 6 terabytes was imaged, and we set up, we had a 15 terabyte SAN, load all that data, and then we had all the different agencies, the FBI, the Army Military Intelligence, Army CID, OSI, counterintelligence field activity, everybody came in and bounced off of that data. We also had the first deployed digital forensics team in the global war, in the invasion of Iraq. They were, pretty primitive. Each one had each guy, I sent 5 guys, 2 of them were computer crime investigators and 3 forensic examiners, and they each had 3 Pelican cases, and that included all their clothes and weapons. But they actually got there, and they were actually attached to the Special Forces guys. They were the first ones in Baghdad. They were actually kicking Saddam Hussein's palace doors down, looking for computers, and forensically processing for tactical intel, looking for the guys on the deck of cards, looking for the weapons of mass destruction. On-site support, obviously, court appearances, that's primary mission, but we assist with search warrants, lots of search warrants, especially when you go into a defense contractor and you take down a data center, you're 150 PCs, 11 servers is not unusual. That's pretty heavy duty stuff. We actually have a portable SANS, 24 terabytes that we can roll in, 3 cases, each one weighs about 400 pounds, and we can image, about 24 terabytes on scene. Support task forces, intelligence, counter-espionage operations, and also support for the special ops community. The Institute, which I'm the director of, we do the research and the development, tests and evaluations, we do digital forensics intel and outreach. Primary customers, who you would think, same as everybody else. Some of the stuff that we built, and we have a forensic imager, DCCI DD, which is certainly available to anybody who would like a forensic imager. It incorporates MD5 and SHA-1 hashes, peer-to-peer data extractions. Now, some of the other tools that we've developed are only open to federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies. Instant messaging, we've developed some tools to extract that information, metadata viewers. We're working on, since we can recover data from cut-up diskettes, nobody has cut-up diskettes anymore, so we're still struggling with CDs and hard drives. The FBI, NSA, and DCCI, we have a project ongoing with University of Maryland and a couple other universities to recover data from hard drives that have bullet holes in them, because guess what, we get those now. And so we're getting data now from some of the early 90 drives. So good stuff. Malicious code analyzers, steganography analysis, obviously. But the main thing that we do is we do test and evaluation of all the tools. All the tools that are used in a forensics lab have to be tested and evaluated, otherwise you can't use them in an accredited lab. That includes hardware and software. Well, if we're dealing with ballistics and tool marks, you know, the same tools and the same techniques that they used 20 years ago, they're still using today. It's not, but with digital forensics, like for instance, Parabon. Parabon puts out a new version because there's a new cell phone or pager every week, so they put out a new version. I have to test that version before we can use it in the lab. So major moving target. And make sure that the results from that forensic exam are going to be accurate, repeatable, and predictable. If it's not forensics, it's something else. And like I said, we have to do all the different platforms. So that causes a problem in the government because, you know, Jose and I were talking last night at dinner. You know, before we go out and buy, you know, we have 50 examiners and 10 hardware techs in the lab. And each one has multiple systems. Before we go out and buy new systems, we got to test them to see if they're forensically sound. So we go through the acquisition process, and it may take 6 months to get that damn piece of hardware in, and then it takes me another 2 months to test it. Well, now I can't buy it anymore because they've got a new version. So this is obviously problematic for us. Things that we have online, DC3.mil is a catalog of different studies and projects that we have. So if you're interested, if you're a government agency or a contractor working for a government agency, you can have your sponsor send us and we'll send you a copy of that report or the software if we can. From our outreach, we run an annual conference. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have academic internships, so I know a lot of folks are here from academia. We're certainly looking at bringing interns in. We have a daily computer crime newsletter. It's just basically news links. So that's open to everybody if anybody's interested in that. Lots of working groups and exchange programs with NSA. This is the dispatch. So if you would like to subscribe to this, just send an email to dcci.dispatch@dc3.gov, and we put this out on a regular basis, and those are the categories of things. So it's not security related, although you're going to find stuff in there. It's going to be computer crime and legal issues a lot. DoD Cybercrime Conference, we host an annual DoD Cybercrime Conference. This will be our 5th, coming up on the 9th through the 12th, and actually the 9th through the 14th of 2006 in Clearwater, Florida. General Radke was our keynote speaker and our co-sponsor last year. He was the director of the Defense Information Systems Agency as well as the commander of the Joint Task Force for Global Network Operations. So the JTF GNO was our co-sponsor. We had over 550 attendees last year, 14 tracks, and about 133 presentations. Now, what we do is, you know, whenever we have a computer crime in the Department of Defense, there are 3 major categories of folks that are affected. Your system administrators, IA folks, those are our victims, and the folks who detect the problem. Then we have the investigators and the forensic examiners who are doing the investigation, and then you have the prosecutors. So we have a legal track, we have an IA track, and we have a law enforcement track. We also have a small R&D track, and we do also provide training and tools and workshops. So if you're interested in that, you have to be a government agency or a contractor working for a government agency to attend. This is a list of the folks organizations that did attend last year. 2 columns on the left are DoD, and then the other were federal, state, and local, and it's also open to the 5 I countries, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and the US. Now, how many of you sat in any of the legal presentations this week? Okay. Well, how many of you have to deal with your legal advisor, your general counsel on a regular basis? Okay. Well, this is my lawyer. So at our conference, he was running my legal track. And you know, like most lawyers, he told me I couldn't do something. And he pissed me off. So at lunchtime, I coordinated to have his ass arrested. So I knocked on the door and I said, hey, Don, could you come out for a second? We had the cameras rolling and we had him frisked, handcuffed, had a perp walk and put him in a golf cart and hauled his ass out. So, where we hold the conference is at Weston Golf Resort. It's a terrific place. It's 4 championship golf courses. They give us the government rate. All the facilities are free. It's really a terrific place. But they do have alligators, so after I had my general counsel, I had to go find a replacement for him out on the golf course. Where we need some research, so anybody who's doing any research and would like to provide help to us, we're certainly open to help. Data mining, steganography, steg analysis, we do a lot with steg. Don't have the budgets to develop detecting tools, although we have a couple unclassified tools that we did develop. We can't compete with the big boys on that, but what we do is we evaluate products. So we have most of the tools, and what we do is we have a control library of pristine images, and we have a series of a couple thousand images that we know what was stegged in them, and now we run. And there was one program that I won't mention, but it cost about $7,000 to detect steganography. And when we ran it against our control library, it had a 94% false positive hit rate. So, so we're kind of working to be a consumer reports kind of organization. Password cracking, metadata, PKI, biometrics. There ought to be a lot of footprints left by biometrics. We certainly would like to know what that means, so we're working with the DoD's Biometric Fusion Center. I'll give you a real quick example. Child porn, image modification morphing detector. Ashcroft versus the Free Speech Coalition. Back in 1996, Congress passed the Child Pornography Protection Act, and it basically said child pornography was illegal and a contraband because every time you showed a picture of a child in a sexually explicit manner, you have sexually abused the child. Therefore, it is a contraband. So possession of child pornography is like possessing cocaine. It's a contraband. Well, the law basically said if it looks like a child, it is a child. Okay? Well, the Free Speech Coalition said, no, that's not right. If it's not a real child, you don't have a victim, therefore you can't have child pornography. It's got to be a real victim. And the results, the Supreme Court overturned that law in the spring of 2003, and the dramatic result was if you didn't know who the victim was, because you couldn't tell whether the difference between a real person and a computer-generated or computer-altered picture, so you had to know the identity of the victim. Well, the vast majority are unknown. So if you don't know who the victim is, I think there's only like 2,200 victims that are known out of the millions of images out there. So the prosecutions came to a screeching halt. So a couple of my engineers got together and said, hey, I think I can tell the difference between an altered picture or computer-generated picture and a real person. So the one on the left here is from Final Fantasy, and then this is Jack Halloran's Fantasy over here. So if you run some filters with Adobe Photoshop, you'll see that a computer-generated image doesn't have well-defined lines. But Jack pointed out that she does have well-defined lines. You look at it, you do the examination, you're looking at shadowing and light sourcing, and it has to be consistent. When you run a histogram on a computer-generated image, you will see these little white lines. That means an absence of color. When you run it on a real person, there is never an absence of color. So we developed a protocol, and now what we can do is we can determine whether it's a real person or a computer-generated, computer-altered person and picture. And now we don't need to know who the identity is to be able to prosecute people who are perpetrating child pornography. Metadata, you guys know all about metadata, so it's great stuff, including, could have the serial number of the camera that took the picture. That's pretty good evidence. PDAs, now you can, if you lose them, you can call a number, and next time it's turned on, it'll zero out all the data. It's a great security feature. But if you're a bad guy and we seize it, and as we leave, you dial that number, or you call somebody and have them dial that number, and all of a sudden, next time we turn it on, it deletes all the evidence. That's a bad thing. So we went out, we had a contractor said, tell me how to protect these PDAs. So they came up with this little box, cost me $400 to build one of these boxes. Now I got to have these at every field location, 600 around the world, and train people how to use them. And then they said, you know what? If you use a paint can and you put them in a paint can with bubble wrap, it actually works better than the specially $400 design box. And oh, by the way, every law enforcement office has paint cans already in their office because we use them for ashes in arson investigations. So we have a $3 to $5 solution for that. Training program, I got 1 minute, and lots of training. Each one of these courses is about 2 weeks. It's free to DoD folks. FBI, Secret Service, and State Department's diplomatic security buy our courses. State-of-the-art facilities and current trends, and that's the end. So this is basically how you get a hold of us if you're interested. Going to the Cybercrime Conference, dodcybercrime.com is our website. If you're interested in that dispatch, dcci.dispatch@dc3.gov. I'm sorry? That one? Yes, sir. You want to sleep with one of our agents? Is that what you're saying? Oh, okay. Well, yeah. You can turn that. I think you're full of shit. So, I'll take other questions. If you want to talk afterward, I'll be glad to explain. I bet you would. You can take a number.
Okay. There are supposed to be CDs available down near registration. I don't know how crowded it'll be getting down there, but have a shot at it. And in my defense, I didn't do picture analysis, but I did do destruction of media data. So I was roughly 10 years ahead of what Jim was doing.